Hey everyone! Hope you're having a great day so far. Welcome to Live with CXPA. I am Gabe Smith, CCXP. I am the content manager for CXPA. I'm excited, as always, to be with you today to discuss a topic that is really near and dear to my heart, and that is empathy. Um, as content manager, one of the things that I do and I love doing each week is I read all the articles that come into the CXPA engine, which is our weekly newsletter. So I read them all. And I have, by the way, if you're not subscribed to our weekly newsletter and you'd like to be, tons of great content each week to fuel your career and your CX success, drop us a note in the comments and we'll make sure to get you the link to subscribe to that. So I read all these articles each week, and there's so many articles that are coming out that are being written on the importance of empathy in customer experience. So then why then, you might ask, are we doing a LinkedIn Live about this topic if the CX content machine is churning out so many articles about empathy? Well, the reason is that most of these articles discuss empathy as it relates to customer service. And I think that, we can all agree empathy is such a critical piece of a service interaction. We want our, frontline customer care or service agents to be empathetic to customers. But what role does empathy play for CX professionals, for those of us who are charged with looking across the entire organization or have that sort of larger mandate? How can we harness the power of empathy in our organizations? How can we harness that power for our customers? So I'm really excited to welcome our guest for today's program. But before I do that, first wanted to, as always, check in with all of you and see how are you feeling today and where are you tuning in from? So see, we've got some folks who are tuning in. Let me know where you are from. Sylvia, greetings from Poland. Awesome. Greetings. Hello to you as well. And I see we've gotten some comments already. Fantastic. And some requests to sign up for the newsletter. Awesome, Jamie. We'll get you taken care of there. That is great. Looking forward to continuing to see where you're from. Mabel is joining us from the Netherlands. Hey, Mabel, great to see you. We have Jamie's in Liverpool in the UK. We have another. Oh, hi. Hey, Megan. Great to see you. Excellent. We've got Silicon Valley in the house, Maryland. We have Israel, Minneapolis, Cambridge. Awesome. My favorite part of every show is just seeing the level of engagement and commitment from the global audience. So love to see all of you here. We've got Spain, Mexico. Fantastic. Fantastic. So great to see you all here. Can't wait to get started on this conversation. So, as always, if you have questions or comments during the show, please post them in the comments. We'll try to address them during the program and leave some time at the end as well. But this discussion is really going to be enriched by each one of you. So make sure that you're sharing, that you're asking questions, and we'll get to them. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce our guest today, and that is Steven J. Ramirez. Steven is a popular CX strategist and speaker. He focuses on the technology and trends affecting CX. His insights have appeared in Bloomberg, American Banker, Financial Brand, Fortune, and other industry publications. Steven is the CEO of customer experience agency Beyond the Arc, where he leads client engagements that helps to transform customer communications, align brand and marketing with customer experience, and infuse empathy into business processes and corporate culture. Steven earned his BA and his MBA from the University of California, Berkeley. Welcome, Steven.
Hey, Gabe. Glad to be here.
So happy to have you here to talk about this important topic. And I know, you share my sentiment that, though empathy is talked about so often, it's usually in this service context, and it's less about the role of empathy in a more holistic CX sense. So, reading your bio there, it stuck out to me that your organization aims to infuse empathy into business processes and organizational culture. So tell me a little bit more about that, and why do you view that as important?
Well, Gabe, I think you hit on a really key point. So if organizations are only focused on empathy from a customer support perspective, isn't it too late by then? Right? Isn't that the end of the process? And I think that what we have tried to do now for literally, Gabe, for the last 10 years is to try to shift from this reactive perspective to a proactive perspective to say, how do we actually put ourselves in the customer's shoes? How do we understand really what they're thinking and what they are feeling? And with that understanding, how do we do business in a different way? Those are the types of questions that we try to bring to organizations as they make this shift in organizational culture.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned, isn't it too late? At that point, at the service interaction, I think that's so true. One of the things I love that Annette Franz, CCXP, has said is, service is what happens when the experience breaks down. And so, I love that point that, and hey, it may be too late. And so let's start that intervention a little bit earlier. So, what does that look like? What does empathy in practice look like when we start to think at the level of, organizational culture and embedding empathy into a culture? What does that start to look like in your experience?
Well, I think that as CX professionals, I think that we're all focused on, trying to remove friction, right? We're trying to make things efficient and effortless, and to be able to make things go by fast, right? And of course, I think that those values are important. But I think that what we sometimes miss in that is really the human dynamic, right? That we're moving people through processes very quickly, but are we really understanding what their needs are? Are we just getting them off the phone as quickly as possible? Are we just getting them to a resolution, but not really giving them kind of the satisfying response or the satisfying experience that they're looking for? I think that, Gabe, that's when we start to think about the customer journey, and that we start to think about not just what they are doing and helping them to do it faster, but that it has this more kind of human-centered approach. I believe that that's what it starts to look like from an organizational perspective.
Yeah. And so, how does one begin to shift an organizational mindset into that human-centered, orientation when there are so many organizations that are focused on, efficiency, speed? How do you start to shift that culture?
Well, from a beyond the arc perspective, I mean, we've always believed right from the very beginning that customer insights and customer data has to drive those decisions. And so I think to truly put yourselves in the customer shoes, there's a number of different techniques, but I think that it really does start with data to be able to drive those insights.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we tend to think of, voice of the customer as a means of collecting data. What are some other ways to sort of gain that deep understanding of how your customers are feeling, so that we can develop that empathy for what they're going through? And this is not just a question for you, Stephen. I would ask that question of our viewers as well.
Yeah, I would love to hear from people. This is a great opportunity. If you've, no matter what platform you've tuned in on, I'd love to see your comments. Like, how
Yeah.
is your organization tackling this? I'd love to see that. I'll start it off, Gabe, and then let's see what people kind of chime in with. I think as CX, as a CX profession, I think that we've gotten some great mileage out of creating personas and journey maps, and I think that those are absolutely critical. However, I think that one of the things that I don't always see in the journey map is this idea of what are people thinking and what are people feeling at this time. A lot of times the journey map is just about the interaction and doesn't, again, take that kind of that real lens on what I'd say sort of the human side is. And of course, I think that's a lot more difficult, right? Because as you said, it's and there's not just a single experience. There's people, and there's not just a universal like how people are feeling. So you have to have ways to be able to absorb that information. So yes, voice of the customer, but I also think it's about frontline listening. Your team that are interacting with your customers every day, do they have channels to be able to kind of bubble up some of the things that they're hearing about the lives that the customers are leading?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. And Jamie says, before you can create change, you must first win the hearts and minds of your customers and employees. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Jamie's right on there, and I think that when I think about the hearts and minds part, that also to me speaks to the importance of communications, both the internal communications and your customer communications. And I think that that's one of the great leverage points with empathy, is to be able to, like, that's how you express empathy is through those communications. And again, I've seen, and I'm interested in what other people are seeing, but I've seen that the internal communications, again, are often focused on, they're focused on the business. They're very kind of corporate centered. They're not even focused on the employees, much less the employees' relationship with customers.
Yeah, and so where is the? Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying there. It's focused on our internal objectives, and maybe empathy is not at the forefront. But why does that point of failure happen? What's standing in the way there? And I guess kind of it leads into this question of like, I think there's a thought that empathy is something that you either have it or you don't. You're born with it, or you kind of, that's just how you communicate. So how do you teach professionals? Can you teach professionals how to be more empathetic?
Well, the good news is I think that yes, you can, and my team has been doing it for years. And I'll just tell you what some of the exercises that we do. One of the things that I find is really helpful is to help people get outside of their work hat and be able to think, literally to think like a customer, right? Or even just to think of themselves as a customer. And it's funny, Gabe, it doesn't take much. Like once you get out of your role and you just think about you, or I often say, hey, think about how your next door neighbor might address this, or think about how you might explain this to your aunt. As soon as you start to personalize it, you get a very different response. And so I think that we can train people to kind of get out of their work box and think, and I think that we do have maybe this history. And I think it would be great from the audience, because I think that some of these traits are more uniquely American, right? I think that we've done more to compartmentalize ourselves and not look at people holistically. I'd be curious if people have a sense of what that's like cross-culturally.
Yeah, great point. If you're not in the United States, especially, would love to hear from you around, what's the role of empathy in your organizations? Is this a topic of discussion? Want to highlight a comment. Bulbul said, it's a great discussion. I think it's very important to capture what the customer wants to accomplish. What do they feel while using your product, and what is their mindset?
Yeah, I think that that's right on. And I would take that a step further and say, it's not just what they're feeling while they're using your product. I think it really is, and what are they feeling at that time? And I think a good example of that I always think about is, the challenges that organizations deal with when the topics are very emotional. So for example, I think about the process of a loved one trying to close bank accounts after somebody in the family has passed away. Right. So it's not, they have to go through a certain sort of set of procedures and processes, but there is such an overwhelming human set of emotions that are going on that if you don't have recognition of those, that it's hard, it's hard to understand why something seems so simple. Like, why can't the person follow those directions? You know what I mean? You can very quickly see that there's a bigger emotional context. That's the most blatant, but I think that there are others that kind of underscore that point.
Yeah, it's a great point. I want to bring in what John said here too. It's important to experience things firsthand, go on field trips, put yourselves in the shoes of your customer. I can say I've experienced how powerful that can be. Prior to working for CXPA, I was a CX consultant with the American Cancer Society, and one of the things that we did is we brought in cancer patients and survivors to speak to different groups in the organization to really sort of understand, what is that journey like? These are people that we're serving with our services. So what are some of the challenges that they have? And like you said, and that's an emotional context. And so it's even, really critical to have that level of empathy.
Yeah, Gabe, and just on that point too, I think early on in my career, back before we knew what this CX thing, what to call this CX thing, but I was involved in working with large retailers, across the country, rolling out. And at that time, I was working with the Hollywood studios, so I was rolling out, new movies to DVD. And one of the most vital things was actually the store visits, right? To just, to go through any time that we were in a location away from home, we would go and visit the Walmarts and the Targets and the Best Buys, walk the aisles, check the merchandising, just sort of see what the experience was, and to see how the strategy, and I think this is a big point. Someone touched on it in the chat, how the strategy translates to the execution on the store floor, right? Like how big a gap there can be between that. So I think that these are all ways that you understand that human context, which helps to make your planning more real when you are thinking about how you incorporate empathy, from a business perspective.
Yeah, such a great point. How to make your planning more real and make that come to life and make it matter. So, I want to bring in a great point from the comments. Zephyr said, I feel like most brands and organizations today really focus on talking. There are very few brands that really are focused on active listening, which seems to be a hallmark of empathy. What's your take on that comment, Steven?
I'd say absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really true, and I think there's a couple of things that I want to unpack there. I think that first of all, it does underscore the necessity to have processes to listen. Right. And so that may be as formal as a voice of the customer program. But even if you don't have a formal VOC program in place, I think it is about ways to inject customer feedback and customer insights. I think that part is critical. But as I mentioned, we do a lot of work in communications. And I think a large part of that is also how you communicate. Even when you communicate in writing, even when you're talking about your product, you don't have to be talking about yourself. And I think the question is, like, in those written communications, can you pivot to put the customer at the center of the communication, right? So it's not what your product does, but it's more about how the customer benefits from it, right? I think that's a very simple shift of looking at the other side of the coin and trying to look at it. And I think that makes it feel different. I think it makes it feel like I understand what you're trying to accomplish, and here's how the product or service that I offer helps you to do that.
Yeah, Steven, I think Ellie kind of agrees with you based on her comment here that relate to customers as people with jobs to be done. There's no one size fits all. All human beings are different and appreciate different things. Empathy helps personalize experiences.
Yeah, that's the first. Should get bonus points for that. I think that's the first mention of personalization in this conversation. That's one of the secret words for today. So there should be like a little chicken that comes down. So
we'll work on it.
Please, Gabe, please add the animated chicken, okay?
You got it. You got it.
But I think that the key thing there is that it is this movement towards personalization, right? Because I think that the idea that there's only one experience, or that there's only one set of feelings that people are having is obviously wrong. So how do we begin to personalize to fit each individual customer? And I often talk about that in terms of trying to deliver empathy at scale. And I think that's a big challenge, but it's tied, sort of at the hip with personalization.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. And you got me thinking, we're talking about communications, about the sort of glut of communications I've received from various organizations during COVID-19 about, what they're doing. And, the ones that were really focused on how their actions are impacting me and how they're thinking about me stand out from the ones that are just saying, hey, we offer, contactless, whatever now.
Yeah, I've been surprised. I think that starting even last year, there's been a huge missed opportunity as it relates to communications through the pandemic. I think that organizations have been they've emphasized, as you said, here's what we're doing. Here's how we're approaching it. Again, it's all about us, and so easy, I think, to shift that and say, we're providing a cleaner and more sanitary environment to protect your health and give you greater peace of mind, right? I think it's just that shift of what's the company doing for you? Why is this something that we think is helpful and a benefit, on the other side, not just here's all the great things that we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. And some great comments that are coming in. I'm also really, really curious. We were talking about, can empathy be taught? And you're definitely of the opinion, yes, it can be. People should be getting that training. I'm curious from the audience, what roles in your organizations or what business groups are getting training in empathy, if this is something that's taking place? Is it just the service folks? Does it expand to other parts of your organization? Would love to find that out. Steven, in thinking about this topic, and especially during COVID-19, we've all experienced hurt and struggle in different ways through this. And it seems like, we need empathy in our lives more than ever, but it's such a stressful time. Perhaps we're less likely to give it ourselves. I heard a saying once that was like, this is like sort of like two starving people trying to steal each other's food. We need this very much. We want it, but our need makes it perhaps even less likely that we are to give empathy to others. So if there are leaders who are listening in right now, what's some advice that you would give if they're asking themselves how they can take better care of their people during this time?
Wow, Gabe, that is a great question. And I saw something on Twitter yesterday, which immediately comes to mind, that's addressing this issue. And in this discussion, it was sort of like from the manager's perspective. It sort of said, hey, when I said that you should do anything that you need to, for self-care and to take care of yourself, I didn't mean like you should work less. And it's like, I don't think I gave that full justice, but I think that's the idea, is that it's where the rubber hits the road, right? And I think that it's the difference between saying, as a leader, I am interested in these things, or I'm going to espouse this as a vision or as values. Hey, I think that's important, right? Not to undercut that. Okay, that's great. But how are you backing it up? How are you doing business differently that allows your teams to actually take care of themselves. Because I think that, to your point, if they're not taking care of themselves, if they don't have that sense of reassurance and kind of mindfulness, that it is not going to be possible for them to convey that to your customers.
Yeah. What a big difference between just saying, hey, take care of yourself, versus putting some structure in place to make that actually easier and achievable for your people.
Yeah, and to do that in a consistent way, right?
Yeah.
And to say that, to basically, I also think that does have to be personalized. And so what that means is empowering, managers throughout the entire chain to be able to create flexible arrangements with employees, and to be able to give people opportunity to control their schedule better. There's lots of things that we can do to empower employees, and I think that empowering employees is essential. It's an essential part to this topic of delivering on empathy. You cannot deliver on empathy in a robotic, mechanistic, procedural way, right? I think the very nature of acting with empathy is really proactively delivering on this idea that we are all human, and that we are explicitly acknowledging kind of the role of human emotion in these business transactions that we have.
Yeah, great point. And Steven, in preparation for this conversation, I was thinking about a conversation that our CEO Greg and I had earlier in the year with a man named Darren Roberts. We had a conversation around how to develop more empathetic leaders. And if the audience doesn't know Darren, he's a great follow on LinkedIn. He's done a ton of work with sports leadership at the University of Texas at Austin. I just have a quick clip that I wanted to play, Steven, and kind of get your reaction to, because I think it's pretty germane to our discussion today. So I'll play that clip and then we'll chat.
So, we as humans, and if anyone doubts this sort of staple to the human dimension, just scroll through Twitter for 5 minutes, and you're going to see some prime examples of humans not staying out of judgment.
Yeah,
this is important, Gabe. It's so important because oftentimes, while the brain is trying to find a comparable experience, we're also filtering what we hear through our own moral filter and lens. And then we start making these determinations. Oftentimes it's on a very dangerous 0-1, yes, no, right, wrong dimension. I think we're seeing that right now in our world where, there's been this sort of dark line that's been drawn on several issues, and you're sort of on one side or the other. You're either right or wrong. But staying out of judgment, especially for the leader who wants to build connection, it's crucial. It's crucial. And I think that it's also a practice that takes a lot of intentionality, because it is our really our tendency and our desire to fit things into easy mental cubicles in order for us to process them.
So, we've talked about the fact that active listening is critical to being more empathetic, and I think Darren, outlined that staying out of judgments is critical to active listening. So, I'm curious, what's your take on his comment?
I think he's got some really insightful things that he shares just in that little clip there. I do think that it's the right goal to stay out of judgment. However, I will just say, very difficult for all of us. I think that we've all seen that our judgment, is influenced by our own personal worldview. There are so many things that sneak in, both implicit and explicit bias. So we see the world the way, with a certain set of lenses. For me, what that says, though, is while we may not be able to stay out of judgment, at least recognize when you're being judgy, right? At least try to take that extra step and at least check yourself. And I think that there's also a discipline to recognize that your experience is not the universal experience, right? And again, I will say that kind of as Americans, I think that we fall victim to this more readily than people from other cultures, where we think that our lives, my personal life doesn't everybody live this way? Aren't the things that I believe the same as what everybody believes? And so I think that trying to recognize that, and again, my bias is that with data and facts, that we can start to reality check our biases and reality check our worldview, and understand that, understand kind of the factual base. And I'll just say one other thing, kind of about that, and that's, I feel like the world, particularly now, right, all bets are off, right, under the pandemic, right, life as we know it has shifted really dramatically, but in general, the pace of change is faster than it's ever been, right? So at these times, even if you were spot on with your judgment, 18 months ago, the world has totally changed, and I think it makes kind of data-driven insights more important. Or another way of saying that is, hey, more important now that you be listening.
Yeah, great point, Steven. Our understanding has been upended, and so a lot of work to be done. I know a lot of people who are watching have already been undertaking that effort. But let me ask, because I think when we start to talk about empathy, there's a subset of people who would say, hey, I think this is fluff. This all feel good, kind of kumbaya stuff. So what would you say to those people who are thinking, okay, if I'm going to make an investment in this, how are you going to make this case to me that this is something that my organization needs?
Well, I guess where I naturally start is from a customer experience perspective. And I say, well, I think that this is intrinsic to delivering an excellent customer experience. And thankfully, at this point, now some 10 or more years into CX as a profession, we know that there is a quantifiable ROI on excellent customer experience, right? The organizations that do customer experience well, you know what? They've got higher stock market valuations. They've got better growth. They've got lower issues, with morale in terms of employees and turnover. So the fortunate side is there's tons of quantifiable metrics that say, deliver an excellent customer experience, and from a business perspective, there's an ROI. Mm-hmm. And I think that from that, it's not hard to argue that, can you really deliver an excellent customer experience without this sharp focus on empathy? I'd say the answer is dubious at best, right? Your chances, or let's put it in the positive. You know what? It's going to be a lot easier to deliver an excellent customer experience if you nail empathy, right? I think that's the business case for really focusing on this.
Yeah. Zephyr said, definitely not fluff. This is literally my job. I talk to C-suite leaders, make sure that people understand the ROI on their expenditures on experience. Fantastic. Not fluff. I think, we all know that, but it's good to sort of embrace that devil's advocate role and say, how do you respond to those who are going to be really skeptical of this stuff? And we're talking about feelings.
Yeah, so and I think that there is another side to this, right? And I think we can go a little bit deeper there and say, yes. However, how do we know if any single initiative or any single project is worth it? How do we know that what we're doing is really moving the needle? And to me, I think that does speak to, one of the tougher parts of customer experience, which is being able to tie our activities to quantifiable and trackable metrics, right? So I think that definitely, and certainly in terms of making the case for empathy, I will be the first to say it is hard to associate hard metrics to the pursuit of empathy. So I think that's a challenge and an opportunity for all of us as customer experience professionals. And if you feel like your organization's doing well on this, again, love to hear, love to see this in the chat. Please, give us some ideas. And I'll say one other thing.
How are you demonstrating it? I'm really curious.
Yeah, right, Dave. I think
these folks that are saying they're doing it.
question.
I'm like, how are you doing it? Share your knowledge. Would love to hear it.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And I think the other thing is, I find that you can infuse empathy in just about everything that you do in a series of baby steps, none of which are costly. Right, it really is just a matter of a change in tone, a change in messaging, a change in approach. It often doesn't require changes that are expensive, like a system change or process change, right? So I guess I'm saying I think that there's a case to be made that a shift to being more empathetic can be accomplished without the ROI is easier to accomplish because there's not a lot of cost associated with this shift. It's really about a change in mindset and a change in culture.
Yeah, great. I see some other folks are chiming in saying would love to learn how others are measuring the needle too. Yeah, absolutely. So critically important. And Steven, I know, kind of shifting gears just a little bit, you do a lot of work with companies in financial services and technology, utilities, media, a really wide range of industries. So, what are some other trends that you're seeing related to CX more broadly that we should all be keeping an eye on this year?
Well, I think that's a good transition, because I think that the number one on our list is this real focus on what we're calling hyper personalization. And we've made the statement that hyper personalization is going to be the new standard. And I think it's for many of the reasons that we've actually already said, right? That to really understand what people are. Not only what they're trying to accomplish. Like I think figuring out the jobs to be done is, as things go, relatively straightforward. I think much more complicated is, why is that the job that they are doing? What are they feeling as they go through this? And how can we help them on every level? I think that this is possible. And I think that the technology leaders like Apple and Google, Amazon, Tesla, I think that they are delivering on this new hyper personalization in ways that are just delivering delight. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a big one. I mean, Gabe, what do you think? Do you see that link between personalization and empathy?
Yeah, absolutely. I just had this happen the other night. I was trying to at least start to do my taxes online. Like, I wasn't ready to finish doing my taxes, but I was ready to at least start putting some pieces into place. And I wasn't sure what to fill out in one of these fields. And I noticed that the tax prep software had the ability for me to talk with a CPA and actually share that small snippet of my screen, just a small snippet of my screen with that CPA. So the guy comes on, he says, hey, this is how long I've been a CPA, establish that sort of credibility and expertise. I'm like, okay, great. And I just really felt like he's like, yeah, hey, this stuff's really complicated. That's why they pay me to do this stuff. And I thought, wow, what a great anticipation of a pain point. What a great process to institute. So and I felt like it was super personal to me. And then I had I already had a kind of a level of expertise, and he didn't, sort of talk down to me at all. So I'm right there with you. Because I really just felt seen. I really felt like my situation was really understood in that moment, and I got exactly what I needed.
Yeah, Gabe, that's a great example. It actually hits another trend that we've published on just recently, and that's this idea that technology is going to foster a new hybrid CX. And what we're talking about is this exact idea of kind of digital plus human interactions, right? And specifically just the one that you talked about, the ability to, initiate perhaps a digital experience, but then pull an expert in via video or through live chat, right? I mean, that's like the poster child experience for what that looks like. And again, I think that for all of us as CX professionals, this is, I think, a dramatically new way of thinking, right? I think that it's the move. Of course, digital has been on our agenda collectively for years, but it is really, I think, this move from digital being this separate thing to digital just being infused in everything that we do, and designing these what I'm calling these hybrid CX experiences. I think that is where the future is going very, very quickly, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and Lisa asks, are companies using AI, or how are they accomplishing this?
Yes, so I think that on one level we're going to see more AI, and so one of our predictions, machine learning and AI, will be essential for contextual experiences. But you don't have to even make there's a roadmap to AI, but you don't even have to make the jump to AI, because I think that, for example, the kind of experience that you're talking about, where if you are working through an online tool and you hit a point where you want to be able to talk to somebody, that does not require AI, right? Your ability to click that button and say, yes, I'd like to talk to a CPA live right at this very moment, that didn't require machine learning, right? That just required a handy interface and somebody standing by with the ability to inject that expertise, right? So it's technology enabled. Yes, AI and machine learning make a difference, but it's not like you can't make progress, until you have nailed the AI part of that equation.
Yeah. Great point. We've got a question here for you, Steven. And that's around, what are the skills that you believe organizations and leaders are missing and need to focus on? So we've been talking about empathy, but I don't know if your sense is that that's one of the things that's broadly missing, or if there are others that you'd want to bring to the forefront as well.
All right, I'm gonna answer that question, but only on the condition that Jamie also answers it in the chat. Okay. I believe if you ask difficult questions, you should also have to come up with answers. So Jamie, you can start working on this as I take my pass. And Gabe, there's no reason why you should escape either. So I think we should have you in the hot seat too. So maybe you should be thinking about this as well.
Yeah, I'll think about it.
Look, I do think that the number one thing I would say is it's not just empathy, but I guess I would say it's human-centered decision making. I think that we often think about, and honestly, I admit I went to business school some many decades ago now, and the one thing that was that was sort of battered into my brain was maximize shareholder value, right? That's the one thing. And I think that while that's still true, isn't it just as important to make sure that we have humans at the center of our decisions, right? I think that is absolutely critical, and I see more organizations doing a better and better job of that. So I'd say human-centered decisions are number one. I think number two, and I think under that, by the way, I would put empathy. I think number two is we have this unprecedented ability to make decisions based on data, and I think that having data fuel our actions, all the way to machine learning and AI being more data driven in everything that we do, I think that that's a second foundation. So human centered, data driven, and I think the third one, and we're seeing it here on this call, it's think global, right? Like no matter what business you're in, now the boundaries have been almost erased, and so as you create new experiences, you have to realize that you're serving people kind of around the planet. So Gabe, that's my very long answer of my top three customer experience, like what's missing. But let's see, did we get an answer for Jamie? I don't know.
We're still waiting on Jamie. That's cool.
Okay.
Jamie.
I don't want to put him on the spot. Maybe conveniently to get some coffee or something. That's what I would have done.
Yeah, I'll say, Stephen, one thing I'm interested in studying this year, and I shared this a couple weeks ago on this program as a New Year's resolution, is I think that change management more than ever is a really critical piece that's part and parcel to CX, because the pace of change, COVID has only accelerated and will continue to accelerate. And helping people to navigate through the practical realities of what those changes mean, but also the emotional realities as well, and what that means for their work, because change isn't going away anytime soon.
Oh, Gabe, I think that's so incredible, and I'll tell you, I do feel like from a customer experience professionals association, from a CXPA level, I don't know if we've tackled those topics. I think that there's some fertile ground as as leaders of customer experience. What is our role in helping to I'll say not only map out the change, but sort of, as you're alluding to, successfully make it through, right? Like, how do we contribute? How do we contribute to that? I think that's right on the money.
Yeah. So we've heard from Jamie as well, and we'll share Zephyr's comment as well. Jamie said, "I believe empathy, purpose, and inspiration are what's missing. The younger generation would rather work for a compelling purpose over a high salary. We must inspire from day one and paint the picture of what success looks like."
Great feedback on that, Jamie. I totally agree. And one other thing, I've seen in the news recently that I think really resonated with me was this discussion of people in their 30s wondering what they can do to be able to retire. Right. And this was in particular was an article like, hey, how to retire in your 30s. And that really got me thinking. And I led some conversation in social media to say, why is it that somebody in their 30s wants to retire? Like, what is it what is it about their current circumstance that puts retirement on the kind of on the map for them? And I think it is this idea of living and acting with purpose, right? And I do believe that millennials and Gen Z have a much keener appreciation of that than perhaps previous generations have. And so I do think that this is again another kind of generational shift, and to be honest, a huge opportunity for all of us as CX professionals, right? It's a very different life and mindset. So really good.
Listening, number one. Using technology and data to understand customer needs in a privacy-oriented way.
Great point. Yeah,
we haven't really touched on that, but I think I think empathy is certainly needed towards people's privacy needs and desires as well. Allowing customers to self-organize into communities to help themselves. Yeah. Great thoughts. Great thoughts, Zephyr.
Yeah, and in the context of empathy, I think that privacy point is really is really important. I mean, think about the kind of the creepiness of really smart AI that knows what you're thinking and feeling, and you don't want it to. Right. This is something that you were talking actually about life in a small town, right? And what it's like when everybody knows your business. I'm wondering what's your take when every AI knows your business?
Yeah. So for the audience, Steve and I are talking about the fact that I live in a small town. I live in a town of just over 4,000 people. Moved to the small town to be a little closer to family, and one of my first experiences was around, moving from a city. You make liberal use of your horn when you're driving, and I realized pretty quickly that if you honk at someone in my small town, you're probably going to end up going to the same place as they are, because there aren't many places to go in the small town. So yeah, I think it can be a little bit creepy when someone is sort of wondering, wanting to know all about you, wanting to know all about who you are, who your family is, and so yeah, we have those considerations in our analog and our digital lives.
Yeah, and I think that as we become more data driven, certainly this idea and hyper personalized, I think it emphasizes the importance that be on an opt-in basis, right? That And I think as organizations, and I'll go even so far as to say from a marketing perspective, we have to deliver a very clear value proposition as to why it is in your best interest as a customer to share your information with you, with us, so that we can better serve you. Right? I think that those are really really key key considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking about how Zephyr framed that around privacy considerations, and I was thinking about this idea of empathy and privacy, and I was recalling that over Christmas I actually received a couple of Christmas gifts that had, in the weeks leading up to Christmas, been shown to me as digital ads. And what had happened was that my wife was looking for Christmas gifts that she then purchased, that then were displayed to me in advance as digital ads. So I had this moment of like, my gosh, this AI fueled attempt to personalize and display things that are relevant to me had this sort of emotional impact of almost like preloading my Christmas gifts into my mind. And there's just some really interesting implications there that kind of straddle those lines between privacy and empathy that I think we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gabe, so just one other trend I want to touch on, because I think it's relevant in this context of the discussion around empathy, and that is, I think that we're going to see that for breakthrough thinking and for entirely new experiences, for the design of those, that it's going to be important for organizations to have diverse voices as part of that conversation. And we as a firm believe that diversity is a key driver to creativity and to breakthrough thinking. And that as you are designing experiences, I've sort of talked about it in terms of kind of global perspective, but I think it's also relevant just in the United States to realize that, again, your experience is not the experience, and that seeking this kind of diversity of opinion, diversity of background, that this is going to be critical to success for a number of different reasons. I would say for 2021 for sure, and most likely beyond.
Yeah, great thoughts. I think we've got time for one more question. Haja asks, said, I'm loving this conversation from Toronto. How do you make empathy the center of the experience without becoming unauthentic?
That is the question. Gabe, you got to take on that. That's a tough one. Why don't you take on the tough ones for one?
I think it relates to kind of what you were just saying, that if you are encouraging diversity of thought and viewpoints, and you're surrounding yourself with people who are doing that, then I think authenticity will follow. So I think that's tough. That's tough to get right, but that's the goal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two other things I would add. I think that first, to be able to deliver on empathy, that you as an organization have to invest the time in defining your authentic self. Right. So who are you? What value do you provide? And what is the voice? What is the voice of your brand? I think that is really critical. I think the other thing, though, is that, you got to walk the talk. And so you will be inherently inauthentic if what you say does not match what you do. Right? That is probably the biggest, yep, most profound point here, is that you cannot tell people that your organization is, acts with empathy. This is only something that you can demonstrate. And if you say it without doing it, then it's a huge detriment. Comes across really fake, and I think it's actually a negative. It's not even a neutral. I think it's a negative, versus anything.
Yep. The conversation with Steven Ramirez, CEO of Beyond the Arc. Steven, it's been so great having you with us. Can you tell me if others want to get in touch with you on social media or to connect with you, how should they do that?
LinkedIn. We were right here. You know, if you're, I noticed not everybody's tuning in on LinkedIn, but catch up with me in LinkedIn. I'm Steven Ramirez, CEO of Beyond the Arc. If you're on Twitter, you can also catch me on Twitter. I'm there every day at Beyond the Arc.
Fantastic. Steven, so great to have you with us today. Really appreciate you.
Gabe, this has been terrific, so much fun, and I definitely appreciate all the great participation from around the world. You know, guys, it's been a great experience. So awesome to be part of this community.
Yeah, fantastic. And if you want to join our next show, mark your calendars, February 8th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be joined by guest co-host Nick Glimsdahl. We'll be talking about real talk with the C-suite about CX. We'll be joined by some C-level executives from a variety of industries and geographies. We're going to have a lively conversation. Make sure to tune in February 8th, 12 p.m. Also, if you are interested in engaging in more of these kinds of meaningful conversations with CX pros, check out our virtual communities. Whether you are in Dallas, whether you are in Dubai, you're going to have a chance to connect with others in your geography specifically or in your areas of expertise. So we've got a really thriving B2B community. So check that out, cxpa.org/get involved/join community. Just go to cxpa.org, check it out. So, so glad that you've joined us today. We've had Steve, I know, speaking for you, Steven, we've had a blast. It's been a great conversation. Thanks for all the engagement. And we're looking forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.